TV host crosses the line with Trump, but Trump's response ends it all. The host, known for being sharp, fearless, and sometimes even ruthless, had one goal that evening: to expose President Donald Trump. This was the night he wanted to make headlines, to ask the tough questions no one else dared to ask. He had spent weeks preparing, studying every detail, every quote, every past controversy. He believed he was ready. He believed this was the moment he could finally trip up the most unpredictable guest in television history. Social media had been hyping the show for days. Every platform was flooded with teasers. The interview that will finally reveal the truth. Producers whispered to reporters that the host had crafted a list of questions so bold, so direct, that even President Trump, known for his quick comebacks and unmatched media control, would find it difficult to stay calm. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the show was about to begin. The stage was perfectly set. A gleaming desk, 2 elegant chairs, and a crowd so silent that even a breath could be heard. The host sat poised, gripping the cue cards tightly, rehearsing the first question in his mind. Then, the studio doors opened, and there he was. President Donald Trump walked in with his unmistakable stride, confident, assured, and completely unfazed. He smiled broadly, waving to the cheering audience, shaking a few hands as cameras flashed across the room. It wasn't just an entrance. It was a statement. He looked like a man who knew the spotlight belonged to him. The host stood to greet him, offering a polite handshake. But even that simple gesture carried weight. Trump's handshake was firm, his expression calm yet unreadable. The host forced a smile, but beneath it his heart raced. There was tension in the air, the kind that cuts through silence and fills the room with invisible energy. Everyone expected President Trump to be on the defensive that night. But what no one knew, not the audience, not the producers, not even the host himself, was that before the night was over, everything would change. Because by the end of the interview, it wouldn't be President Trump on the defensive. It would be the host. The opening questions were soft, light-hearted conversation, a few jokes, even a compliment or two about President Trump's past success in business. The audience laughed, the atmosphere felt relaxed, and for a few brief moments, it seemed like this interview might actually be friendly. The host smiled easily. Trump responded with his trademark humor, and everyone watching could feel the rhythm of a typical talk show. Smooth, polite, predictable, but then, almost like a sudden shift in the wind, the tone changed. The host leaned forward slightly, his expression sharpening. The audience could sense it immediately. The warmth began to fade, replaced by curiosity and tension. The host adjusted his cue cards, took a deep breath, and asked the question he had been waiting for. "Mr. President," he began, his voice calm but deliberate. "Many say your leadership style is more about control than cooperation. Some even call it manipulative. What do you say to those people who think your success comes from intimidation rather than inspiration?" The room went completely still. The laughter died, the air grew heavy, and every eye turned toward President Trump. Trump didn't answer right away. Instead, he gave a small smile, the kind of smile that said he'd heard this question 100 times before. He looked directly at the host, then at the audience, and replied slowly, "Well, I'd say those people probably never built anything themselves." The crowd chuckled nervously, a mix of amusement and surprise at how casually he deflected the question. But the host wasn't about to let it slide. He pressed on, flipping to his next card. He began bringing up controversies, past tweets, political clashes, and moments that had made headlines. His tone grew sharper with each question, clearly hoping to corner the president, to force a reaction. He asked about criticism from former allies, about the business deals that had sparked debate, even about personal remarks that had stirred outrage online. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing that the real interview was beginning now. The host looked determined. He was ready to dismantle President Trump piece by piece, question by question, word by word. But what happened next caught everyone by surprise. Because instead of reacting defensively or losing his composure, President Trump did something entirely unexpected. something that would flip the whole interview on its head. As the host listed off criticism after criticism, President Trump stayed unusually calm. He wasn't interrupting, he wasn't fidgeting, and he wasn't throwing counterpunches. He was simply waiting, watching, listening. His expression was unreadable, almost as if he knew something the host didn't. The audience could feel the tension growing with each question. The host's voice grew sharper, more confident, believing that he was finally getting under Trump's skin. He brought up every possible criticism, accusations of ego, claims of self-interest, stories of controversy that had followed the president for years. Each one was delivered with precision, meant to push him into a defensive corner. And then came the harshest question of the night. The host leaned forward and said, his voice laced with challenge, "Some say you only care about yourself, that your decisions were always about power, not people. How do you respond to that?" For a moment, silence filled the studio. The air felt thick. Then President Trump leaned forward slightly, looked the host directly in the eyes, and asked quietly, "Let me ask you something. Do you really believe that?" The host froze. The question hit harder than expected. He had prepared for rebuttals, not reversals. The sudden shift in control left him speechless. Trump continued, his tone calm but firm. "Because I've noticed something. Every time someone says that about me, it's usually someone who's never had to make a hard decision themselves. Have you ever had to lay off thousands to save tens of thousands of jobs? Have you ever had to choose between being loved and being effective?" The audience sat in complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The host tried to gather his thoughts, searching for a response, but before he could, Trump went on, not with anger, but with steady conviction. "You know, people like to talk about leadership as if it's a popularity contest. But leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being responsible when everyone else runs away." It was a line that landed like thunder. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The host, who had been in control just moments ago, now looked unsettled, almost shaken. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay quiet, but one thing was certain. President Trump had just turned the entire interview upside down. The host regrouped, taking a deep breath and glancing down at his notes. He could feel the interview slipping out of his hands, and he needed to pull it back. His reputation was built on controlling the narrative, on asking the kind of questions that made even the most confident guests stumble. He forced a quick smile and tried to steady his tone. He said, "But surely, Mr. President, you can understand why people criticize you for being controversial, for being divisive. Many believe your words create more conflict than unity." President Trump nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "Of course," he said evenly. "I understand it better than anyone. But let me tell you something no one ever talks about." He leaned back in his chair, the lights reflecting off his cufflinks as the room fell into silence once again. Then he said, clearly and deliberately, "When you stand for something, truly stand for it, you'll always divide people. Half will hate you, half will follow you. But the worst thing you can ever be is forgettable." You could hear a pin drop. The host blinked, momentarily speechless. The audience sat frozen, hanging onto every word. There was something raw in the president's tone, not defensive, not boastful, but certain. It was the kind of statement that demanded attention, even from those who disagreed with him. President Trump looked around the studio, his gaze sweeping across the crowd before settling back on the host. His voice dropped slightly, calm yet cutting. "The real reason people come after me isn't because they disagree with me," he said. "It's because I remind them that they could be doing more, that they could be standing for something too. It's easier to attack than to act." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a long moment, even the host had no comeback. His expression softened, unsure whether to argue or to listen. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single clap echoed. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the studio filled with applause, not the kind driven by politics or partisanship, but by the sheer boldness of what had just been said. The host forced a smile, trying to change the subject, but it was too late. The mood had already shifted. President Trump was no longer the one being questioned. He was the one commanding the room. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, the audience was still frozen in their seats. No one spoke. No one moved. The energy in the studio felt strange, part awe, part disbelief. What had started as a bold, confrontational exposé had transformed into one of the most unexpected and unforgettable interviews of the year. Behind the scenes, the producers exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the outcome they had imagined. They had spent weeks crafting the perfect narrative, one that would show the host as sharp, fearless, and unshakable. But now, as the final red light on the camera faded, the truth was undeniable. President Donald Trump had flipped the entire script. The host sat in silence, his microphone still clipped to his suit, staring at the empty desk. His hands rested on his cue cards. The same questions that had once given him confidence now looked powerless. He replayed the interview in his mind, every moment, every pause, every response. He had come in ready to expose weakness, but instead he had been confronted with strength. Outside the studio, the world reacted instantly. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of President Trump's calm, commanding responses spread like wildfire. The line that everyone repeated was the one that cut the deepest. Leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being responsible when everyone else runs away. The internet lit up with debates, reactions, and analysis. Some praised the president for his composure and insight, while others criticized the host for losing control of the narrative. But regardless of opinion, one truth was undeniable. He had commanded the room. Later that night, in a quiet post-interview chat, the host admitted something few expected. "I came in ready to challenge him," he said softly. "I didn't expect him to challenge me." That admission spread almost as quickly as the interview itself. The image of the host, once so confident, now quietly reflective, became the symbol of the evening. It wasn't about who won or lost. It was about the power of staying composed when the world expects you to crumble. As the studio lights dimmed and the crew packed up their gear, one thing lingered in the air, a silence heavy with thought. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is said when everyone else stops talking.